Gunshots pierced the silence of the night, each crack a whip against the vast sleeping desert. Garrett Reed was awake before the first echo died, his weathered hand already closing around the cold steel of the Colt revolver he kept beneath his pillow. It was a reflex honed by 15 years of sleeping with one eye open, a soldier's instinct that refused to fade. Sweat beaded on his forehead, a stark contrast to the autumn chill that had settled over the Arizona territory. A frantic drummer took up a beat behind his breastbone as the sound of retreating hoofbeats faded into the valley. He moved with the grim economy of a man who knew violence intimately. Boots coat then into the ink-black darkness of his small ranch house. The moon, a sliver of bone in the sky, cast long skeletal shadows across the yard as Garrett stepped onto the porch, pistol raised. 3 riders cloaked in black were melting over the ridge, their silhouettes dissolving into the night like ghosts returning to an unquiet grave. The acrid smell of gunpowder, sharp and metallic, hung in the still air. Garrett made his way to the barn lantern held high, its yellow light a fragile shield against the oppressive dark. What he found inside made his blood run cold. His prized stallion, Sarah's pride, lay dead in the hay, a single precise bullet hole between its eyes. The horse had been a gift from his wife Sarah, the last living piece of her he had left a 4-legged memory of a softer time. Its dark coat, usually gleaming with life, was dull in the lantern light. On the rough-hewn barn wall above the horse, someone had scrawled a message in the animal's own blood, and the letters stark and dripping. The debt will be paid. Garrett's hand, calloused and steady moments before, trembled as he reached out, touching the sticky warmth. It was more than a warning. It was a violation, a desecration. As he stared at the words, his gaze caught a glint of metal on the packed earth floor near the stallion's head. He knelt his bad knee, protesting, and picked it up. It was a small brass button, tarnished with age, bearing the insignia of the 7th Cavalry. An antique, the kind worn 15 years ago. A cold dread, sharp as a shard of ice, settled in his gut. He knew this button. He had seen its like 100 times on the uniforms of the men he served with, the men who had died and the men he had fled from, men from Ghost Valley. They found me, he whispered the words swallowed by the vast, uncaring darkness. The year was 1885. And the Arizona Territory remained a lawless frontier where a man's past was a predator patient and relentless. For 15 years, Garrett Reed had tried to outrun his ghosts. Now they had tracked him to Eagle's Ridge, the small, failing ranch he'd built with his own 2 hands, and they had come to collect. Morning revealed the full, calculated cruelty of the attack. Fine red sand, glowing like embers under the unforgiving sun, did little to soften the harsh reality. The lock on his storage shed had been broken, its contents rifled through. Nothing was taken, but it was clear they had been searching for something specific, something that would irrevocably link Garrett Reed's struggling rancher to the blood-soaked ground of Ghost Valley. At 40, Garrett wore the land on his face. His once black hair had surrendered to gray at the temples, and deep lines carved by sun and sorrow etched his weather-beaten features. Years of hard living had left their mark, but it was the burden of memory, the weight of the dead, that stooped his broad shoulders. The ranch, his penance and his sanctuary, was failing. 3 months behind on his mortgage payments to the First Territorial Bank in Silver Creek, Garrett faced losing the only thing he had built that hadn't been born of destruction. His cattle herd had been decimated by drought the previous summer, and every attempt to rebuild had been met with the kind of bad luck that felt personal. He surveyed his 200 acres of rolling hills and rocky soil, his mind drifting to the bank's final notice. One more missed payment, and Eagle's Ridge would be auctioned to the highest bidder. Rumors in town whispered of the Silver Ridge Mining Company, a corporate behemoth eagerly buying up struggling ranches, paying cash with a smile that never reached the eyes of its agents. Garrett had ignored their offers. This land was more than property. It was a promise to Sarah, a chance to grow something good from the earth after years of turning it red. The distant rumble of thunder pulled him from his thoughts. A storm was brewing on the horizon, a bruised purple mass of clouds that promised rain the parched earth desperately needed. Garrett spent the day in a flurry of grim activity reinforcing the barn roof where Sarah's pride still lay, securing his remaining livestock. By nightfall, the wind had become a mournful howl, driving fat raindrops against the windows like scattered buckshot. He ate a solitary dinner of beans and cornbread, the storm's fury, a fitting soundtrack to his darkening mood. The button on the table seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, stirring memories best left buried deep. Memories of screaming women and children, of burning lodges, painting the night sky orange, of a young soldier whose ideals had turned to ash in the dust of Ghost Valley. The storm reached its crescendo around midnight, lightning tearing the sky and illuminating the ranch in stark, brilliant flashes. Between the deafening claps of thunder, Garrett heard a sound that didn't belong: movement in the barn. He grabbed his shotgun and a lantern, the old soldier taking over once more. The 50 yards between the house and barn became a gauntlet of clinging mud and wind that threatened to extinguish his light. He pushed forward, shotgun ready, the wind whispering through skeletal ocotillo like the voices of the dead. The barn door, which he was certain he'd latched, was ajar, swinging rhythmically on its hinges. Heart pounding a familiar sickening drumbeat, he stepped inside, raising the lantern high. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice nearly lost in another roll of thunder. At first he saw nothing amiss besides the tragic shape of his dead horse. Then a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness near the hay storage. Garrett aimed the shotgun. "Show yourself," he commanded. "Won't ask twice." 3 figures emerged from the shadows, and Garrett nearly dropped his lantern in shock. They were women, and they were the tallest women he had ever seen. Each stood nearly 6 feet with broad shoulders and strong limbs that spoke of a life lived far from the corsets and parlors of the East. They wore a mixture of native buckskin and practical settler garments, their dark hair pulled back in intricate braids. The oldest, her face a mask of impassive dignity, stepped forward. "Garrett Reed," she said. It was not a question. Garrett kept his shotgun level. "How do you know my name? Who are you?" "We know many things," she replied, her English perfect, though her accent was ancient, unlike any tribe he knew from these parts. "We know you live alone. We know you hide your spare key beneath the loose porch board. We know about the scar." Her last words sent a chill through Garrett that had nothing to do with his rain-soaked clothes. The scar, an arrow-shaped mark on his chest, was his most closely guarded secret. A brand from his past. Only 3 people had ever seen it, his father now dead. The army doctor who had treated him long since returned to the East. And the Wakahani medicine man who had saved his life 15 years ago when he should have been left to die. The woman reached into her coat and produced a heavy leather pouch that jingled with the unmistakable sound of gold coins. She held it out. It was more money than Garrett had seen in a decade, enough to save his ranch 10 times over. When he instinctively reached for it, she pulled it back with a small, knowing smile. The healer said you would try to refuse. What healer Garrett demanded, though, a cold certainty, was already forming in his gut. The youngest of the 3 women spoke, her eyes fierce in the lantern light. "He told us you would ask about the scar." Garrett's hand moved instinctively to his chest, where the arrowhead wound lay hidden beneath his shirt. The mark left by the Wakahani warrior who had nearly killed him, removed by the skilled hands of another Wakahani who should have let him die. "Who are you?" he asked again, his voice barely a whisper. "I am Adsilla, the oldest," said her tone calm and measured. "These are my sisters Tuluta and Kimla. Our father sent us to collect what you owe." Garrett lowered his shotgun slowly, memories flooding back, the searing desert heat, blood soaking his uniform. and the weathered face of an old man, cleaning his wound, speaking in broken English of honor and debts that must be paid. Your father, Garrett, said, his mouth dry. The medicine man. Chief Hayamovi Adsilla corrected gently. He became chief when the old one died last winter. And yes, he remembered a foolish young soldier who promised whatever was needed in exchange for his life. Lightning flashed, illuminating the women's faces. They were not alike in features, yet they shared a quiet, formidable strength that seemed to fill the barn, like the scent of rain-soaked earth. 15 years ago, said Tuluta, the middle sister, her voice more analytical than the others, you promised him 3 horses. But you had no horses. So he said you would give him something more valuable when the time came. The weight of 15 years pressed down on Garrett. He remembered now the fevered words, the desperate, grateful promises of a dying boy. I was dying. People say things. Why you? Why here? Why now? He asked, though a part of him was beginning to understand. Kimla, the youngest, let out a short, bitter laugh. Because the soldiers are coming for our land. Because we need protection that only a white man's name can give us. Because you owe a debt. Garrett looked around his failing ranch, the leaking roof, the empty corral where Sarah's pride should have been the fields he could barely afford to plant. Protection. I'm 3 months behind on my mortgage. The bank is coming to take this place. Adsilla opened her leather pouch and poured a handful of gold coins into her palm. They gleamed in the lantern light. Father's savings, the last of what our people had. It is yours if you honor your word. It was salvation in the palm of her hand. Enough to save his land, fix the roof, buy cattle, everything he dreamed of. But the price was unthinkable. 3 wives, 3 giant fugitive women from a tribe his own regiment had helped decimate. I need time to think, he said, his voice strained. Time is what we do not have. Adsilla replied, her calm, unwavering. Our father expects an answer before sunrise. She paused, her dark eyes boring into his. He also said to tell you about the other promise. Garrett's blood ran cold. There had been another, a desperate oath sworn in the delirium of fever. Adsilla nodded slowly. You swore, if I ever break my word to you, may my bloodline end with me. It had seemed meaningless then. Now, looking at the 3 women who could easily overpower him, the words felt like a noose tightening around his neck. He remembers Kimla set a sharp, satisfied edge to her voice. She moved closer, and Garrett caught the scent of leather and wood smoke on her clothes. Good. That makes this easier. Tuluta pulled a rolled paper from her belt. A marriage contract written in crisp English, witnessed by the territorial judge in Prescott. All legal and proper, she said, spreading it on a hay bale. 3 wives, 1 husband. Perfectly legal in this territory, if all parties consent. Garrett stared at the document. The handwriting was precise, official. This had been carefully planned. How did you get a judge to write this? Gold buys many things, Adsilla said simply, including discretion. The barn door creaked open, and all 4 turned toward the sound. A figure stood silhouetted against the storm, tall and lean, though stooped with age and illness. Garrett's breath caught. Though 15 years had passed, he recognized the man instantly. Chief Hayamovi looked exactly as Garrett remembered, but older, grayer, and thinner, with the kind of thinness that spoke of a sickness eating away from within. My daughters have explained, the chief asked, his English still halting, but his voice carrying an undeniable authority. They've explained plenty, Garrett said, finding his footing. But I never agreed to marry anyone. I was 19 and dying. Yes, the chief nodded slowly. People say things when they are dying. I said many things when I was dying last month. But the white doctor in Prescott gave me medicine, bought me time. He coughed a deep rattling sound, and Garrett saw a speck of blood on his lips. Time to see my end of the bargain fulfilled. What bargain? I saved your life. You promised me whatever I needed. Now I need my daughters to survive what is coming. The chief's eyes hardened. The cavalry burned 4 villages last month. Ours is next. But the wives of a white rancher, they will be protected by your laws. Kimla stepped between Garrett and her father. He doesn't want us. Look at him, scared of his own shadow. I'm not scared, Garrett snapped, his pride stinging. I'm being practical. I can barely feed myself, let alone 3. He stopped himself before the words could escape. 3 giant women. Kimla finished for him, a bitter smile on her lips. Say it. We have heard worse. The chief coughed again, harder this time. When he looked up, there was more blood on his chin. The sickness moves fast. I have days, not weeks. Decide, Garrett Reed. Honor your word or face the consequences of breaking it. What consequences? Adsila's hand moved to something hidden beneath her coat. Father is not the only one who remembers promises. Our whole tribe knows what you owe. Just then, Garrett heard the sound he'd been dreading since nightfall. Hoofbeats, approaching fast. Multiple riders. Who's that? He whispered. The chief smiled grimly. That would be my nephews. Come to hear your answer. 4 riders materialized from the storm, their horses lathered with sweat. They were young men, hard-eyed warriors, who dismounted with practiced efficiency, their hands never far from the knives at their belts. The leader, a broad-shouldered man with a jagged scar across his cheek, strode into the barn. Uncle, he said before switching to a rapid tribal language Garrett couldn't understand. Chief Hayamovi responded sharply, the tension in the barn thickening. Speak English, Iota Adsila commanded. Mr. Reed deserves to understand the matter of his future. Iote's dark eyes fixed on Garrett with open hostility. Future. This coward has no future. The cavalry found our camp 2 hours ago. They are asking questions about 3 missing women. He spat on the ground. Women who should be helping us prepare for war, not hiding behind a white man's name. War, Garrett's voice was a croak. The war that started when they burned the Wakahani village. Kimla set her hand resting on her hunting knife. 43 people dead. Children. The barn fell silent, save for the chief's labored breathing. Garrett looked from face to face, seeing the raw grief and rage they had been hiding behind their calm words. The soldiers will come here next, Awota continued. They are tracking footprints. When they find these women, he gestured at the sisters, they will kill us all. Tuluta stepped forward, her voice a steady anchor in the storm of fear. Not if we are legally married. Not if we have protection under white man's law. Law. Aote laughed, a sound like stone grinding on stone. The same law that says we can't own land, that we are not citizens, that they can kill us for sport. Chief Hayamovi raised a trembling hand, silencing the argument. He turned to Garrett, his face a death mask in the dim light. The choice is simple now. Marry my daughters and give them your name for protection, or watch them die when the soldiers arrive. Garrett's throat was as dry as the desert floor. When will they get here? Before dawn, Aote said, maybe sooner. Garrett looked at the 3 women. Really looked. Beneath their strength, he saw bone-deep exhaustion. They weren't conquerors or threats. They were refugees, the last of their line. If I say yes, he said slowly, what happens to you and your nephews? The chief smiled sadly. We disappear into the mountains. Live like ghosts until the anger dies down. He coughed again, more blood speckling his lips. If I live that long. And if you say no, Adsilla said simply, then we all die here, together, because we will not run anymore. A low rumble rolled across the prairie. It wasn't thunder. The storm had passed. That's horses, Iode said, his hand moving to his knife. A lot of them. The ground vibrated. 20 riders, maybe more, moving fast. The root cellar, Garrett said quickly. All of you. I'll say I haven't seen anyone. Aote laughed harshly. You think they will just take your word? They will search every building, every hole? He drew his knife. Better to die fighting. Put that away, Adsilla snapped. Violence will only prove their point. She turned to Garrett, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. But he is right. They will not believe you. Tuluta moved to a crack in the barn wall. 12 soldiers, led by a lieutenant with yellow stripes on his sleeve. She looked back at Garrett. Do you know him? Garrett's stomach dropped. Lieutenant Caldwell. He's been here before. The bank hired him to pressure me into selling. He knows you are desperate, Adsilla finished. If he finds us here, he will assume you are hiding us for money. The hoofbeats stopped directly outside. Caldwell's voice rose above the others. Reed, come on out. Chief Hayamovi grabbed Garrett's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. There is something else you must know, he wheezed. Before you decide. Uncle, not now, Iode hissed. It is exactly the time. The chief's eyes locked onto Garrett's. My daughters are not just refugees. They are wanted. Garrett felt his blood turn to ice. Wanted for what? Kimla stepped forward, her chin raised in defiance. We killed the men who burned our village. The words hit Garrett like a physical blow. He stared at the 3 women, seeing them anew. Fugitives. How many men, he whispered. 6, Tuluta said calmly, but her hands were clenched into fists. They came to our camp drunk, looking for sport. They set fire to the sacred lodge with the elders still inside. So we tracked them to their own camp, and we cut their throats while they slept. Reed Caldwell's voice was right outside the door. Open up, we need to talk. Chief Hayamovi held Garrett's gaze, his eyes burning with fever and desperation. Now you know the truth. Marry them, and you are harboring known killers. Refuse, and you are still harboring known killers. But if they are your wives, you cannot be forced to testify against them. The barn door rattled. 1 minute, Reed. Then we're coming in. Garrett's hand moved to the marriage contract on the hay bale. His mind raced. Impossible choices. Death or a life entwined with murderers. But were they murderers, or were they dispensers of a justice the law would never grant them? I need a pen, he whispered. Adsilla's eyes widened. Tuluta produced a pencil from her belt and pressed it into his palm. Without another thought, Garrett scrawled his name on the bottom line, the letters shaking only slightly. He guided Adsilla's hand to the next line, then urged her sisters forward. Quickly. As the last signature was added, he turned to Iode and the nephews. You're my ranch hands. Hired on this morning. Keep your mouths shut and follow my lead. The barn door flew open. Lieutenant Caldwell strode in, flanked by 3 soldiers. He was a thin man with cold blue eyes and a neatly trimmed beard that couldn't hide the cruel twist of his mouth. Reed Caldwell set his gaze sweeping the barn. Interesting company you're keeping. Garrett stepped forward, blocking Caldwell's view of the chief, who was slumped against the wall, looking more dead than alive. Lieutenant, what brings you out here so late? Tracking dangerous fugitives. 3 native women who murdered 6 white men near the Wakahani Reservation. Witnesses saw them heading in this direction. "Haven't seen any women," Garrett said, his voice surprisingly steady. "Just hired some new hands to help with the ranch." Caldwell's eyes fixed on Adsilla, taking in her height and undeniable femininity. "That's a mighty big ranch hand you got there, Reed." "This is my wife, Garrett," said the words feeling alien in his mouth. "Adsilla Reed. We were married this afternoon." The silence stretched thick and heavy. Caldwell's eyes narrowed, moving from Adsilla to Toluta and Kimla. "Your wife's got sisters, does she?" "My other wives," Garrett said, committing fully. "Toluta and Kimla Reed, all legal and proper." One of Caldwell's men snorted. 3 wives? What kind of man? "The kind who follows territorial law," Garrett interrupted, holding up the freshly signed marriage certificate. "Witnessed and sealed in Prescott yesterday." Caldwell snatched the document, his jaw tightening as he examined the official language, the judge's signature, the seals. Everything was in order. "Convenient timing," he said finally. "Marrying 3 native women right when we're hunting 3 native murderers." "My wives are from the Tohono O'odham tribe," Garrett lied smoothly. "Peaceful farmers from the south. Never been anywhere near Wakahani land." Adsilla stepped forward, a master of her own presence, seeming to shrink her imposing frame, making herself appear smaller, less threatening. "Lieutenant, sir," she said, her accent just right. "We have been traveling for weeks to reach my husband's ranch. We know nothing of any troubles." Caldwell's gaze shifted to the chief. "And him?" "My father-in-law," Garrett said. "Sick with a fever. We're caring for him." Aote moved to support his uncle, the picture of filial duty. Caldwell studied each face, searching for a lie, for a flicker of fear. He found only weary people trying to care for a dying man. Finally, he thrust the certificate back at Garrett. "If I find out you're lying to me, Reed, I'll see you hang alongside them." "I understand, Lieutenant." Caldwell signaled his men out. At the doorway, he paused. "I'll be watching this place, Reed. Any trouble, any sign these women aren't what they claim to be, and I'll be back." As the soldiers rode away, Garrett's legs nearly gave out. He stared at the marriage certificate, the ink still wet. 3 wives. He'd gone from a reclusive bachelor to a polygamist in the span of 5 minutes. "Thank you," Adsilla said quietly. "That was brave." "Stupid, more likely," Garrett replied. "Caldwell's not done with us." Aote helped his uncle lie down on a bed of hay. The chief's breathing was shallow. "We will camp in the hills," Aote told his uncle. "Close enough to help if needed." Chief Hayamovi reached out and grasped Garrett's hand. "Protect them," he wheezed. "They are all that is left of our bloodline." "I will," Garrett promised, and to his own surprise, he meant it. As Aote and the others melted into the darkness, Garrett led his new family toward the house. The small building seemed to shrink as they approached. "There is something else," Kimla said on the porch. "The bounty on our heads. It's not just from the territory." She met his eyes. The dead men's families put up their own reward. $500 each, dead or alive. $1,500, more money than most men saw in a lifetime. "Every bounty hunter from here to California will be coming for us," Toluta added quietly. As if summoned by her words, the distant sound of hoofbeats echoed across the prairie. Not soldiers this time. 3 riders moving with the slow, deliberate confidence of men who hunted other men for a living. "Bounty hunters," Kimla whispered. Garrett blew out the lamp. Adsilla took the back door, Toluta the side window, Kimla the front. They moved as one, a practiced deadly unit. "How do we play this?" Garrett asked. "Same as before," Adsilla said. "We are your wives. Legal. Protected." "They won't care about legal," Toluta said grimly. $1,500 makes men forget about the law. A polite, almost friendly knock echoed through the house. "Mr. Reed, sorry to bother you so late. Name's Blackwood. Eli Blackwood. Most folks call me the Desert Fox." The voice was smooth-laced with a sly wit. "We're tracking 3 native women. Big women traveling together. You seen anyone like that?" Garrett opened the door a crack. "Just my wives. We were married yesterday." Blackwood's smile never wavered, but his eyes sharp as a hawk's sharpened further. "Mind if I meet them? Always nice to congratulate newlyweds." There was no refusing. Blackwood stepped inside a man who moved with a serpentine grace. He was of average height, with a lean frame and a face that seemed pleasant until you looked into his eyes and saw the cold, calculating intelligence within. Adsilla emerged from the kitchen carrying a coffee pot, a perfect picture of domesticity. "Ma'am," Blackwood said, tipping his hat. "Thank you," she replied. "Coffee." "That's kind of you." He accepted a cup but didn't drink. His gaze swept over Tuluta and Kimla as they entered. 3 wives. That is unusual. "Legal in this territory," Garrett said quickly. "Oh, I know it's legal," Blackwood said, setting his untouched coffee down. His hand moved casually, resting near the butt of his gun. "It's just, the women I'm tracking are also 3 sisters. Also unusually large." "What are the odds?" The friendly mask was gone, replaced by a cold amusement. "See, I've been hunting fugitives for 12 years, and in my experience, when 3 wanted women disappear and 3 wives suddenly appear in the same area, well, coincidences make me nervous." Kimla stepped forward, the glint of her hunting knife visible in her hand. "Maybe you should leave." Blackwood's smile returned cruel and sharp. "And maybe you should come with me. Quietly. Dead or alive, the bounty pays the same." Just then, the front door opened, and Chief Hayamovi staggered in, supported by Iote. He looked like death itself, but he was carrying something that made Blackwood's face go pale, a silver badge official with territorial markings. "Deputy Chief Hayamovi," the old man wheezed, holding the badge aloft. "Territorial Marshal's office. These women are under my protection." Blackwood stared at the badge, then at the dying man. "That's impossible." "Check the files," and Prescott Hayamovi said, his voice gaining strength from some final reserve. "I have been working undercover for 6 months tracking the real killers. These women are my operatives." It was a desperate, brilliant lie. Blackwood hesitated, his cunning mind weighing the possibilities. Undercover marshals don't marry their operatives to civilians. "They do when it's the only way to maintain cover," Hayamovi replied. "The real killers are white men dressed as natives trying to start a war." Blackwood studied the badge for a long moment. Finally, he holstered his gun. "I will need to verify this in Prescott." Of course, Hayamovi nodded. "Marshal Davidson will confirm everything." At the threshold, Blackwood paused and looked back at Garrett. "You're either the luckiest man in the territory or the unluckiest. Time will tell which." As the bounty hunters rode away, Chief Hayamovi collapsed. The badge fell from his fingers, clattering on the floor. "Where did you get that?" Garrett asked, kneeling beside him. Hayamovi smiled weakly. "Took it off a dead marshal 3 years ago. Been saving it for something important." His breathing grew shallow. "Thought tonight qualified." Over the next hour, he slipped away peacefully, surrounded by his daughters. His last words, whispered to Adsilla, were, "He said we should be happy, that we found a good man." Aote and his nephews carried their uncle's body into the hills for a proper burial. As the sun rose, Garrett found himself alone with his 3 wives. The weight of their new reality settled over them. "So," Kimla said, breaking the silence, What now? Garrett looked around his small house, trying to imagine it as a home for 4. I suppose we figure out how to make this work. Over the following weeks, they did more than manage. Adsilla, with a keen business sense, used her father's gold to pay off the mortgage and invest shrewdly. Tuluta, the strategist, organized their lives with military precision, turning the failing ranch into a thriving enterprise. And Kimla, with her fierce, untamed spirit, brought laughter back into a house that had been silent for too long. It was not love, not yet, but a partnership forged in desperation, was slowly tempered into respect, affection, and a profound, unspoken bond. But peace was a fragile thing. Blackwood's parting words echoed in Garrett's mind, and the brass cavalry button, hidden away in a small wooden box, served as a constant reminder that the past was never truly buried. The debt to Hayamovi had been honored, but another older debt remained. And Garrett knew with a cold certainty that the man who had left that button would be back to collect. The seasons turned. A harsh winter blanketed Eagle's Ridge in a sea of white, isolating them, forcing them into a fragile domesticity. Evenings were spent by the fire, the 4 of them sharing stories, weaving the disparate threads of their lives together. Garrett learned of Adsilla's wisdom, Tuluta's strategic mind, Kimla's battlefield scars. In return, he offered carefully curated pieces of his own past, always skirting the blood-soaked ground of Ghost Valley. The truth of that day remained a ghost he was not yet ready to face. Spring arrived with a sudden violent thaw. One morning just before dawn, the sound of something heavy being dragged across the porch snapped Garrett from a restless sleep. He reached for his revolver, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. The women were already awake, moving silently to their now familiar defensive positions. Garrett peered through a crack in the curtains. A body lay on his porch. A young cavalry scout, an arrow protruding from his chest. An arrow fletched with eagle feathers marked with the unmistakable symbol of the Wakahani tribe. Beside the body, carved into the wooden planks of the porch, were 5 words, "The debt is not paid." "Someone is trying to frame us," Adsilla said, her voice grim as she examined the arrow. "This is not one of ours." An hour later, as they finished burying the scout in a shallow grave behind the barn, Kimla spotted riders. "Soldiers," she hissed. "A full patrol, riding hard." Garrett recognized the leader instantly. Not Caldwell, but Captain Sullivan, a man with a reputation for ruthless efficiency and an unwavering belief in military justice. He was in his 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes to match. Reed Sullivan said, his voice crisp, "We're looking for a missing scout. Private Wilson." His horse returned to the fort without him. "Haven't seen him," Captain Garrett lied, his posture relaxed despite the frantic drumming in his chest. Sullivan's gaze swept over the ranch, noting its prosperity. "Heard you were on the verge of losing this place last fall. Seems your fortunes have changed." His eyes narrowed as Tuluta emerged from the house. "And you've acquired a family. 3 native wives, I understand. Quite a coincidence when we've been tracking 3 native women who murdered 6 men and disappeared 4 months ago." The confrontation was tense, a verbal chess match. Sullivan knew far too much. He knew their father was Chief Hayamovi of the Wakahani, not the Tohono o Odom, and he knew something that made Garrett's blood run cold. "You served with the 7th Cavalry for a time, I believe?" Sullivan stated, his eyes boring into Garrett. "Long enough to have been at Ghost Valley." The air crackled. The unspoken name of the massacre hung between them. "I was there," Garrett admitted. "Separated from my unit. Nearly died." "Yet here you are," Sullivan smiled coldly, "when so many others did not return." A commotion from the barn interrupted them. One of Sullivan's men had been searching without permission and had earned a bloody nose from Kimla's fist for his trouble. Quite a right hook your wife has, Reed Sullivan observed with cold amusement. My father taught me to defend what is mine, Kimla spat. Your father Sullivan repeated thoughtfully. The late Chief Hayamovi. I make it my business to know things, Reed. For instance, I know he was the medicine man for the Wakahani. And I know why a former cavalry soldier might marry the daughters of a man whose tribe was massacred by that same cavalry. He paused. Unless, of course, there's a connection we're all missing. With a final chilling promise to find Private Wilson, he and his men departed. That night, the truth finally came out. Huddled in the small house, Garrett confessed everything about Ghost Valley. It was a massacre. My commanding officer. I tried to stop it. We fought. In the chaos, I was shot. I always thought it was a Wakahani warrior. And now, Adsilla asked quietly. And now I'm not so sure. They decided to go to Silver Creek for supplies to maintain normalcy and gather information. The trip was a risk, but staying put felt like waiting for the hangman. In the general store, while Garrett bought feed, Tuluta listened to the local gossip. What she heard turned her blood to ice. Sullivan's got a personal stake in this, an old-timer whispered. Lost his younger brother at Ghost Valley. A lieutenant. Official report blamed the Indians, but there's always been rumors it was one of his own men who shot him during a mutiny. A sergeant who disappeared that day, presumed dead. On the ride back, the implications settled over them. The lieutenant I fought with, Garrett, said, his voice hollow. His name was Sullivan. He thinks you killed his brother, Tuluta stated, and now he's found you. I didn't kill him, Garrett insisted. He won't care about the truth, she countered. He's been hunting his brother's killer for 15 years. They returned to a scene of devastation. The ranch house was ransacked, the barn doors swinging open. Adsilla and Kimla were gone. Pinned to Garrett's pillow by Kimla's own hunting knife was a note. The handwriting was sharp, precise. The debt will be paid in full. Ghost Valley for Ghost Valley. Bring the badge to Blackwater Canyon at midnight or they die. First them, then you. He has them, Garrett whispered. And he's leading us into a trap. He knew Blackwater Canyon. A narrow, winding death trap with only one way in and out. It was where he had hidden for weeks after Ghost Valley, a fugitive from his own army. They had only one hope. Aote and his cousins still hiding in the hills. Tuluta built a fire, sending up 3 distinct columns of smoke, the ancient signal for blood spilled. As dusk fell, Aote and 4 warriors emerged from the shadows like vengeful spirits. After hearing what had happened, their decision was swift. My uncle saw something in you worth saving, Aote said to Garrett, his gaze hard. You have honored your word to protect his daughters. For that, we will help you. They formulated a desperate plan. Aote would create a diversion at the south end of the canyon, while Garrett and Tuluta, guided by 2 warriors, would take a treacherous game trail along the ridge to get above Sullivan's position. The canyon was a dark gash in the earth, lit only by a single campfire. Tied to stakes near the fire were Adsilla and Kimla. Garrett's heart seized. Hidden in the surrounding rocks were Sullivan's men waiting. At precisely midnight, Aote's war cries echoed from the south, followed by gunfire. Now Garrett commanded. They scrambled down the steep canyon wall. In the ensuing chaos, they managed to free Adsilla and Kimla. But it was a trap within a trap. Of course I knew you'd come. Reed Sullivan's voice boomed from the darkness. He stepped into the firelight on his revolver aimed at Garrett. A man like you could never resist playing the hero. I've waited 15 years to bring my brother's murderer to justice. I didn't kill him, Garrett yelled back over the sound of gunfire. Liar Sullivan's voice cracked with 15 years of grief and rage. You mutinied, and he was shot in the back. The standoff was broken by a flash of movement. Kimla, silent as a hunting cat, had circled around and now lunged at Sullivan, her knife sinking into his shoulder. Garrett charged, tackling the captain. They rolled in the dust, a desperate struggle for survival. Sullivan, fueled by hate, gained the upper hand, his fingers closing around Garrett's throat. Garrett's vision began to tunnel to black. A single gunshot cracked through the night. Sullivan's eyes widened, his grip loosened, and he slumped forward, a fresh bullet hole in his chest. Behind him stood Toluta, Garrett's revolver steady in her hands. You really didn't kill him. Sullivan gasped, blood bubbling from his lips. What? Garrett knelt beside him. My brother Sullivan, whispered, his life fading. It was Blackwood. Hired him to hunt you. He confessed. Said my brother was going to report the massacre. Had to be silenced, used you as the scapegoat. The terrible irony dawned on Garrett. Sullivan had hired his own brother's killer to hunt the man he thought was the killer. Partners. Sullivan coughed. In the mines. Silver Ridge. Ghost Valley. Sitting on silver. His confession was cut short by a rifle shot from the ridge above. Pain exploded in Garrett's side. He fell backward as another shot kicked up dirt by his head. Blackwood, Garrett gasped, clutching his bleeding side as Adsilla dragged him to cover. He's here. The world became a blur of pain, gunfire and shouting. A desperate retreat into a series of caves Garrett knew from his time as a fugitive. Blackwood pursued them, a relentless hunter, herding them deeper into the earth. Inside the absolute darkness, Garrett formulated a new plan, a final, desperate gamble. They would circle back through a hidden tunnel, turn a Blackwood's trap against him. The final confrontation took place in a narrow slot canyon, a dead end with sheer rock walls. They ambushed Blackwood, trapping him between them. It's over, Blackwood, Garrett said, his rifle trained on the bounty hunter. Blackwood laughed, a harsh grating sound. This was never going to end anyway, but one of us dead Reed. He admitted everything with a cold, businesslike detachment. The silver, the partnership with Sullivan, murdering the lieutenant to protect their secret, and framing Garrett for it. They were obstacles to progress, he sneered, just like you. In a final explosive flurry of violence, Blackwood was disarmed by Kimla's perfectly thrown knife. A desperate hand-to-hand struggle with Garrett on the edge of a cliff ended with Blackwood falling into the abyss below, his final curse swallowed by the darkness. Dawn was breaking as they emerged from the canyon, battered, bleeding, but alive. Aote looked down at the chasm where Blackwood had fallen. The debt is paid, he said. Not yet, Garrett murmured, looking toward the distant town of Prescott. Not until the truth is told. They rode into Prescott, a strange, grim procession that brought the town to a standstill. In Judge Morris's chambers, they laid out the entire sordid tale, the Ghost Valley massacre, the Silver Ridge conspiracy, the murders, the frame-ups. Sullivan's dying confession was the final damning piece of evidence. Justice may be slow, the honest judge said, his face grim, but it cannot be denied forever. The fight against Silver Ridge mining had just begun, and it would be long and dangerous. Eagles Ridge was no longer safe. They sold the ranch, and with the last of Chief Hayamovi's gold, bought 300 acres in a verdant, hidden valley in New Mexico territory. A place to start over, a place to be safe. They called it Hayamovi Valley. One warm evening years later, Garrett sat on the porch of the house they had built together, watching his children play in the twilight. Adsilla, Toluta, and Kimla sat with him, no longer just wives in name, but true partners in every sense of the word. They had found more than survival. They had forged a new kind of family, a new kind of life from the ashes of the old. Garrett took out the old tarnished cavalry saber he had carried for 20 years, the last symbol of his haunted past. He walked to a small rise overlooking the valley, to the spot where he had buried a smooth stone in memory of Sarah's pride. With his own hands, he dug a deep hole and laid the saber in the earth, burying the ghost of the soldier he had been. As he stood, Adsilla came and placed a hand on his shoulder. He didn't flinch. He turned, and in the faces of his family, he finally found the peace he had long ago stopped searching for. The quiet, profound realization that this forced arrangement born from a desperate debt had become his salvation.